Montana Territory, August 1879, the first time Patrick North saw her. She was in chains, real iron shackles around her wrists and ankles, a bruise blooming under her cheekbone, and eyes that stared through the world like it had already ended. She was being dragged off a train in the middle of nowhere, escorted by two deputies with badges dulled by dust and sweat, their voices sharp, their hands rough. The platform at Dry Creek Station was half-rotted and empty except for Patrick, there to pick up a load of feed for the ranch. The woman stumbled. One of the deputies yanked her upright by the arm. Patrick stepped off the wagon. "Careful," he said, voice low but clear. "She's still human." The older deputy scoffed. "She's a murderer." The woman's head turned slowly toward Patrick. Her eyes were dark, steady, not afraid. "Not broken, just waiting." "What's her name?" Patrick asked. "She don't need one," the younger deputy sneered. "She's going to be behind bars the rest of her life." Patrick looked at her again. Something in him pulled tight like a wire being wound, not pity, something deeper, like recognition. Like seeing a storm rolling in and knowing it was meant for you. But she didn't say a word. Just looked at him, then let the deputies shove her toward the jail wagon parked at the edge of the station. 2 days later, he saw her again. This time in the holding cell behind the sheriff's office in the town of Red Bluff. Her name was Juliette Vaughn. The sheriff, a man named Cray, had no patience for questions, but Patrick asked anyway. Turns out she had been accused of killing a man out in the Bitterroot Range. A wealthy rancher who had taken her as a servant when she was younger, then tried to keep her like property. She had escaped. He had come after her. He ended up with a bullet in his chest. The jury took less than an hour. Guilty. Life sentence. No one cared that she had no family, no protection, and no voice in court. Patrick stood outside the courthouse when she came out in shackles again, the same dead look in her eyes. He stepped in front of her. "Juliette," he said. Her eyes met his, and this time something flickered. "You should not say my name," she said. Her voice was soft but steady. "It will not help you." Patrick shook his head. "It already has." He did not sleep that night. He thought about the way she stood there, proud even in chains, about the scar along her collarbone, about how nobody had stood up for her. The next morning, he rode out to the prison wagon trail. They had stopped to water the horses. The guards were careless. It took Patrick less than 3 minutes to cut the first chain. Juliette stared at him, breathing hard, her wrists red and raw. "Why are you doing this?" Patrick looked at her hands. "Because nobody else did." She did not smile, not yet, but she did nod. They rode fast into the eastern hills where the land folded up like a blanket and the sky stretched wide. Patrick brought her to a line cabin he used when he checked the outer fences in fall. No one would find them there for a while. By the time the sun set, he had removed every chain. Juliette sat on the porch steps, her wrists wrapped in linen. Patrick poured her a tin cup of water and handed it over. She took it, fingers brushing his. "You do not even know me." "I know enough." "But not everything," she said. "Not why I stayed with him, not what I did before." Patrick sat down beside her. "When you're ready." She looked out at the trees, the way the last light slipped through the branches. "I was 15 when I was sold into his home," she said. "My mother died from fever. My father, I do not know. He vanished. I worked in that house for 7 years. He told me I belonged to him. Until the night I said no." Patrick did not speak. He just watched her, letting the silence settle. "I thought I would die," she said, "but I killed him instead." She turned to him, waiting for something, judgment maybe. But all he said was, "You did what you had to." That night she slept in the cabin bed. He took the floor, but he woke up to find her sitting beside him, knees pulled to her chest, watching him with eyes that no longer looked dead. "I could run," she whispered. "I should." He met her gaze. "I will not stop you." She did not move. She just reached out slowly and touched his hand. "I do not want to run." The next days blurred into each other. Patrick hunted when he could. Juliette learned the rhythm of the cabin, how to start the fire, how to cook trout, how to wash without drawing smoke. She was quiet but not cold. She watched everything. And slowly she began to laugh again. One night, a storm rolled in. Wind howled through the trees. Patrick was fixing the window shutter when she stepped beside him, her hair loose, her eyes soft. "You are not like the others," she said. "I do not want to be." She reached up, touched his jaw. "You do not ask for anything? I just want you safe." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I feel safe with you." He kissed her then. It was not rushed, not wild. Just a slow, careful kiss, the kind that comes after silence, after trust. She leaned into him and he wrapped his arms around her like she belonged there. That night they did not sleep apart. When morning came, the storm had passed and the sun poured through the trees. Juliette stood at the doorway, wrapped in his shirt, her feet bare on the wooden floor. "I have not felt this in ever," she said. Patrick stood behind her, hands on her waist. "What? Hope?" He pressed his lips to her shoulder. "You do not have to lose it again." She turned to him, eyes wet but clear. "You broke every link, Patrick," he pulled her close, "and I will never let them put them back on." The first frost came early that year. By mid-September, the pine needles had dulled to copper, and the wind carried a blade's edge. Patrick rode out before sunrise most mornings to check the upper ridges for signs of elk, leaving Juliette with the rifle and a promise to return before dusk. She'd begun stitching new lining into his gloves, her needlework fast and neat, the thread the color of wheat stalks. One morning, she set the gloves on the table beside a pot of boiled potatoes. When Patrick stepped in, shaking snow from his shoulders, she didn't look up from the fire. "They'll hold longer now," she said. He picked them up, thumb brushing the seams. "You sewed these by hand." "There was a merchant's wife in Helena once, took me in for a season. She taught me to mend things, though I think she meant dresses." She turned then, eyes catching his. "I remember the way she pulled thread with her teeth. I do it the same." Patrick smiled, the corners of his eyes softening. "You've got a way of making things last." Juliette didn't answer at first, then, quietly, "I used to think the only thing I could do was survive." "Maybe that's changing." She didn't say more, but later, when he reached across the table and laced his fingers through hers, she didn't pull away. They stayed close to the cabin for weeks after that. Patrick stacked wood, repaired the north-facing wall, and laid traps along the creek's edge. Juliette kept the fire going and mapped out the days in her own quiet way, boiling roots, steeping bark for tea, humming under her breath while she crushed dried berries between her palms. One night, as the wind hollowed around the eaves, she said, "I was born in Kansas, you know." Patrick looked up from the kettle. "What part?" "Outside Emporia. My mother used to sing in German when she baked. My father built wagons until the summer the river dried out." She paused, adjusting the shawl over her shoulders. "He left one morning and never came back. She waited 3 years." He lowered himself beside her on the floor, knees bent, one arm resting on the hearth. "That's a long time," Juliette nodded. She said love means waiting until your bones forget how to move without someone. Patrick took her hand. "Maybe love can also mean learning how to move again." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I want to believe that." The snow deepened. By late October, the trail to town was nearly impassable. Patrick set snares to catch snowshoe hares. Juliette learned how to tan hides against the cabin's outer wall, her hands red and raw, her face streaked with ash. She didn't complain, only asked questions: how long to soak the skin, what leaf helped with swelling, which tracks meant fox and which meant lynx. "You learn fast," he said one afternoon as she traced a pattern in the snow. "I wasn't allowed to speak much before. Now I want to know everything." That night, she laid a small bundle in his lap, 3 dried sprigs of yarrow wrapped in buckskin. "For fever," she said, "in case one of us gets sick." He touched the bundle with quiet reverence. "You think of everything." "I think of you." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It stretched between them like a blanket, warm and full. November brought a sudden thaw. The river cracked and surged, the ice breaking in long groans. Patrick rode down to check the traps and returned with a torn sleeve and a bloodied arm. Juliette met him at the door, her hands already reaching. "What happened?" "Fell through brush," he winced. "Caught on a rusted fence post." She pressed a cloth against the wound, her brow drawn. "You could have been worse off. I wasn't." She looked up then, and he saw something different in her eyes, not fear, not worry, resolve. "I don't want to lose the first person who ever saw me." He touched her cheek, his palm calloused and warm. "You won't." That night she curled against him on the cot, her breath steady in the crook of his neck. He listened to the wind outside and thought of all the places he'd been. None of them had ever felt like this. The next morning she stood at the threshold, watching the sun rise over the treetops. "When spring comes," she said, "I want to ride into town beside you, not hidden, not afraid." Patrick stepped up behind her, his hand settling at the small of her back. "Then that's what we'll do." Her fingers found his. "I'm not the same woman they locked in chains." He turned her gently, brushing her hair back from her brow. "I know, you're stronger now and free." She smiled, and it was the first time it reached all the way to her eyes. They spent the rest of the day rebuilding the porch steps, side by side, their work slow and deliberate. Neither said much, but every glance, every touch of the hand held the quiet promise of something lasting, something earned. And that night, as Juliette rested her head against his chest, wrapped in a quilt she'd pieced from worn shirts and flour sacks, she whispered, "I want to build a life here." Patrick kissed the top of her head. "Then let's build it together." The thaw held. By the first week of March, dark veins of earth showed beneath the snowpack, and the roof of the cabin wept slow drops into the mossy stone by the steps. A red fox darted through the brush one morning as Juliette rinsed clothes by the creek, its tail a flicker of fire against the pale grass. She watched it vanish into the trees, water dripping from her fingers, and thought of motion, the kind that didn't come from running, but choosing. That afternoon she found Patrick in the lean-to, patching a bridle with narrowed eyes. His shirt was rolled to the elbows, and the cut on his arm had faded to a long, healed line. "We should go to Red Bluff soon," she said. "Before the roads turn to mud, you could trade for sugar, maybe a little salt pork." Patrick ran his thumb along the leather strap, then met her gaze. "We don't need to go there. We need to be seen," she said. "Together, you said you'd ride beside me." "I meant it." She stepped closer, brushing sawdust off his sleeve. "I'm not asking you to fight anyone, just don't let them forget I'm not gone." He folded the bridle and set it aside. "You sure you're ready?" She nodded slowly. "I want them to see what they tried to bury." They left at dawn 2 days later, saddle packs light, the horses eager after so long idle. The air smelled of thawed bark and wet stone. Juliette rode with her chin lifted, her hair braided tight against the wind, a rifle slung across her back. They reached Red Bluff by early afternoon. The town had shrunk since the trial. 2 shops boarded up, a saloon shuttered. But the people still stared. Some paused mid-step, others turned away. A dog barked once and fell silent. Juliette dismounted first. Patrick followed, his hand steady on her lower back as they walked toward the general store. A bell clanged above the door, sharp in the stillness. The storekeeper froze when he saw her. "Afternoon," Patrick said, voice even. "We'll take flour, coffee, dried apples. Whatever's fresh." The man hesitated, then ducked behind the counter without a word. Juliette moved to the shelves, her fingers brushing burlap and tin, her spine straight. Outside, the wind picked up. The door rattled faintly on its hinge. As they stepped out with their goods, an older woman across the street called out, "You think we forgot what she did?" Juliette turned, her gaze level. "I think you never bothered to understand." The woman huffed, but didn't answer. A man by the livery looked away, red rising in his face. Patrick adjusted the pack on his shoulder. "Let's go." They rode east, skirting the edge of the valley as the light began to tilt. No one followed, no one tried to stop them. At the river crossing, Juliette slowed her horse. "I thought it would feel like more." "What you expect, a reckoning maybe, or a fight." Patrick looked over at her. "Sometimes the fight's just staying upright." She gave a small nod. "I think I'm tired of fighting. I want to plant a garden, keep a goat. Maybe make bread that doesn't turn to stone." He smiled with his eyes. "I'll build you a fence that'll hold anything but a bear." She laughed, sudden and clear. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever promised me. They reached the cabin by dusk. The fire was out and the hearth cold. Juliette set the kettle while Patrick split kindling. When the flames caught, she reached for his hand. "The worst is behind us," she said. He looked down at their joined fingers. "You believe that?" "I do." He leaned forward, forehead resting against hers. "Then so do I." Later, as she folded the new sackcloth into the cupboard, she glanced over her shoulder. "There's something I never told you," she said. "Before, everything I used to sing." Patrick set the poker aside. "Will you?" She hesitated, then began, soft and unsteady. A hymn half remembered from childhood. Her voice wasn't perfect, but it filled the room like something sacred. When she finished, he stood behind her, arms slipping around her waist. "I didn't know I needed to hear that," he said. She leaned into him. "You broke my chains. I want to fill the silence they left behind." They stood that way until the fire burned low and the wind outside softened against the timbers. No one came for her after that. No one dared. By the time the first crocus bloomed by the steps, Juliette had planted peas in neat rows behind the cabin. Patrick fixed a swing to the old oak. They spoke less of what had been, more of what could come, and one morning, as mist rose off the hills, she pressed her palm against his chest and said, "I'm not afraid anymore." He kissed her knuckles, gently. "Neither am I." By late April, the soil had warmed enough to take seed, and Juliette knelt in the narrow furrows with a canvas pouch tied at her waist, planting beans 3 at a time with calloused fingers. Patrick worked nearby, repairing the low stone wall that marked the garden's edge. He paused now and again to watch her hands move, deliberate and sure, her braid dark against the faded cotton of her dress. She didn't notice at first. She was humming again, something wordless this time, and he didn't interrupt. When she finally looked up, she wiped her palms on her skirt and said, "I thought about adding squash, but it's greedy, wants too much space." He picked up a stone and turned it in his hand. "We could clear more ground. There's time for that." She stood, stretching her back. "I want to do it slow. Let it grow right." They didn't speak again until evening, when the sky dropped into a pale blush and the air settled. Patrick lit a lantern inside, and Juliette brought water to the table, her nails still dark with earth. She looked at him across the flame and said, "I've been thinking about the cabin." He set down his fork. "What about it? We could build another room off the back. Doesn't have to be big." He leaned forward. "For what?" "I want a space for making things. Sewing, maybe, drying herbs. Somewhere the wind doesn't reach." He nodded once. "We'll cut lumber before the rains come." She watched him a long moment, then reached out and touched his wrist. "You never ask for anything. I've got what I need." "That's not the same." He didn't answer right away. "Then, I want you to stay, and you already do." Outside, a coyote called from the ridge. Neither of them moved in the morning. She found a wooden box by the door. Inside were 2 smooth stones, a handful of nails, and a folded scrap of canvas. When she turned, Patrick was behind her, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's not much," he said, "but it's a start." Her smile didn't rise quick. It came slow, like the sun on a cold morning. That afternoon they marked the new room's edge with sticks and twine. She measured with her feet. He kept pace beside her. At one point she stopped and said, "I want windows, not many, just enough to see the hills." He pulled a pencil from behind his ear. "Show me where," she pointed, and he marked the post. Later, while he shaped joists under the lean-to, she stepped into the woods with a basket slung over her shoulder. She returned with fiddlehead ferns and the first green of nettle. At the door, she hesitated. "I used to hate the forest," she said. "It felt like a trap. Now it feels like a gate." He brushed sawdust from his hands. "That's because you're not hiding anymore." She met his eyes. "I don't want to be." That night, as rain whispered against the roof, they lay with her leg over his, her hand tucked beneath his shirt. His heart beat steady beneath her palm. "Did you ever think," she said, voice low, "you'd end up like this?" "No." "Do you regret it?" He turned toward her. "I regret the years you spent alone." She blinked once, then pressed her forehead to his chest. "You made them quiet. Even the ones behind me." When she slept, he stayed awake a while, watching the fire's last glow. The room smelled of damp pine and worn cotton. He didn't move. The next day, she brought out a book from beneath the bed, a ledger, its cover stained and softened. "It's old," she said, "but the pages are good. I want to keep a record." "Of what? Where we started, what we build." She held it out to him. "You write the first thing." He opened it, thumb brushing the paper's edge. Then he wrote one line, slow and sure. When he handed it back, she read it aloud. "She came through fire and grew." She closed the book and held it against her chest. "I want to learn how to read better," she said, "and write. More than just names. I'll teach you." They didn't speak much after that, but the silence was warm, like something stitched by hand. By the end of the week, the frame of the new room stood, 4 posts rising against the sky. Juliette stood beside him, hair loose, boots streaked with mud. "I never thought I'd make a home with someone." Patrick ran his hand along the beam. "It's not finished yet." She looked at him, eyes steady. "Neither are we." He leaned down then and kissed her, not urgent, not shy, just right. And when the wind moved through the trees behind them, it sounded like the world exhaling. The new room was finished by mid-May, its walls cured pale by sun and sap, the windows set deep to shield from wind. Juliette stood barefoot on the plank floor, running her hand along the sill. The air inside smelled of cut wood and wool thread, the corners stacked with baskets already half filled with lavender and wild mint. Patrick had nailed a row of pegs along one beam, where she hung her shawl and the apron she used for dyeing. He stepped behind her, wiping his palms on his trousers. "Floor's level this time." She turned, tilting her head. "You saying it wasn't before?" "I'm saying I've learned a thing or two." Juliette's mouth curved faintly as she crossed to where he stood. "You've learned how to build a room that feels like a quiet breath." She took his hand and guided it to the center of the floor. "Here," she said, "this is where I want to put a spinning wheel if we can ever trade for one." Patrick nodded once. "We'll find one. Or I'll figure how to make it." Her eyes searched his face. "You always offer more than I ask." "That's how I know I'm home." They didn't speak again until dusk, when the fire carried smoke slow and straight into the pines. Juliette stirred a pot of barley and leeks while Patrick worked a new latch onto the storage chest. She let the kettle hiss before she asked, "Would you want to be a father?" Patrick didn't look up right away. He tested the hinge one last time, then set the hammer down. "I would," he said. "If you wanted it too." "I think I do." Her voice was steady but quiet. "I never let myself think far ahead before, but now I do." He crossed to her side, brushing a curl behind her ear. "We'll raise them here, where the days come slow." She leaned into his shoulder, and for a long time neither of them moved. By early June, the first shoots in the garden had doubled in height, and the creek ran soft and full. Patrick spent his mornings shaping a cradle from cedar boards, each cut measured twice, each joint tight. Juliette watched from the porch, her hands busy carding wool she'd traded for with a passing shepherd family. She was learning how to twist the fibers into thread, her thumbs raw but sure. One warm evening, they sat under the oak tree, dinner finished and the coals still glowing in the pit nearby. Juliette rested her back against Patrick's chest, his legs stretched out on either side of her. "I used to think peace was something you had to steal," she said. Like a moment caught before it vanished, he traced the edge of her palm. "And now I think it's something you build with wood and sweat, with trust." He kissed her temple, the gesture slow and certain. "We've built it then." She tilted her head back to look at him. "We have." The days passed with rhythm, mornings spent in labor, afternoons in light conversation, and evenings in quiet companionship. Juliette stitched linen into swaddling cloths and lined the cradle with wool batting. Patrick re-roofed the stable and hung a new gate on the east fence. When the baby came, the sky was heavy with heat, the pines thick with cicadas. Juliette labored through the night, her hands gripping the edge of the bed frame, breath coming in low, ragged pulls. Patrick never left her side, fetching water, pressing her back with calloused palms, murmuring steady things she didn't need to understand to believe. At dawn, the cry came a single, strong sound that filled the cabin like a bell. "It's a girl," Patrick whispered, his voice gone hoarse. Juliette held her close, skin to skin, tears drying along the bridge of her nose. "Her name is Clara," she said. "It means bright." They wrapped her in a soft woven cloth and laid her in the cradle Patrick had made. Later, as the sun painted the walls gold, Patrick stood in the doorway, watching Juliette sleep with Clara curled against her chest. He stepped outside, the air sweet with pine and drying earth, and looked out toward the hills. He had known many kinds of silence in his life: grief, distance, regret, but this was the first that felt full, not empty. The kind that held promise instead of absence. When he returned inside, Juliette stirred and looked up at him. "You're not afraid?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not anymore." She reached for his hand and brought it to rest lightly over Clara's back. "Then we're the same." That summer passed in long, warm days. Clara grew strong, her fists always moving, her eyes sharp and curious. Juliette sang to her in the mornings quiet songs in half-remembered German, the words strung together with rhythm more than meaning. Patrick carried her through the woods at dusk, pointing out deer trails and the call of mourning doves. They did not speak of the past anymore, not because they had forgotten it, but because it no longer defined them. It had shaped them, yes, but what stood now between them was something wholly new, something they had made with their own hands, Juliette wrote in the ledger most evenings. Not long entries, just a line or two. A recipe, or the day Clara rolled over for the first time, or how the light turned the creek silver just before rain. One night, as the wind rustled the new leaves and Clara slept sound between them, she closed the book and said, "I never thought life could feel this soft." Patrick kissed the inside of her wrist. "It's your doing," she smiled, eyes full of quiet joy. "No. It's ours." And so they stayed in the cabin that grew with them, in the land that held them steady. Through seasons of snow and bloom, through days of work and laughter, through the long, quiet strength of love that did not need to be spoken to be known, they did not look back, only forward. Together,